In today's video, we're going to go over the things we learned from Chelsea 1, Bournemouth 0. Bit of a different game to analyse, and we're going to go into it with some live analysis with the tactics board. Yet again, please do drop a like if you haven't already, subscribe, and let me know what you thought of the game in the comments down below. The team was a bit different today, having quite a few people missing. Enzo Fernandez and Dewsbury Hall out through illness. Of course, you have people like Lavia, Reece James, Gusto, all not available. So we did see Disasi at right back, inverting into that sort of right centre-back role. We saw Vega staying in midfield, with Cucurella taking up an interesting role, which we'll get onto during the live analysis. And then that front four with Palmer, Madueke, Neto and Jackson staying in those usual positions. Okay, let's get into the live analysis section. So we was pretty much setting up in this 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, however you want to sort of view it. Of course, we had a much different team in terms of the configuration the other day with Vega and Caicedo in the midfield. So Palmer was more of a nominal 10, but again, in possession, he was seeing the same sort of movements, which we're going to get onto. So the main movement that we did see was one that some people would find a bit strange, but I kind of get it purely because of the personnel we have in here. And that is, of course, having Cucurella move forward, the back three being formed like so, the pivot staying the same, so still being able to have Vega as a pivot player, and Cucurella moving forward to create that sort of shape here. Now, where the problem for me lied in this game was a few different things, actually. One, Bournemouths Press, which hopefully we've already spoke about, or we might speak about it at the back end of the video, as I'm recording this part before I record the rest of the video in isolation, is the Bournemouth Press and how good it was at almost just forcing Chelsea to face backwards and to almost make this a 5v5 at times, and just stop that progression. The other way was Chelsea have had this bias towards playing through the left and almost having a progress left to penetrate right, is what I've been calling it. So usually you'd have Cole in the middle. He'd be finding those passes through into these areas. And as I said, Enzo has been somebody who's been playing a lot in here. And I do think we missed Enzo a lot in this game. For ball retention, for slowing down the tempo, for allowing us to build slower and get the whole team up rather than sort of disjointed. Because I do think that this game was very disjointed as well in terms of the phases. I think that it struggled to get into a rhythm, especially in the first half. And that's due to Bournemouth's press and how good that was, how effective it was. But this pass here into Cucurella, one, it wasn't really on often enough, or into Neto. And two, when it did go into these areas, the ball wasn't sticking. So it felt like the tempo was just always being risen. And when that ball did go in at a fast pace, they were keeping these players facing in this direction. And it was really hard to get on the ball. And because these players aren't, like Cucurella especially, not used to being in that zone, he was almost forcing the issue. And when that ball was coming in here into these zones, it was almost bouncing back a bit, and they were struggling with a man on their back, really struggling. Ball kept coming forward, backwards more, and into a pressure which was already a 5v5 here. So it was really hard for Chelsea to just establish some control. And it had usually came from Enzo being in this role, where he'd sort of secure the ball and he'd either be really clever and sort of quickly release that ball to over here, where they could attack that 2v2. Or what Enzo did so well, and what he has done so well this season, which a lot of people don't really sort of give him the credit that he deserves for, is he knows when to slow that tempo down and to allow these players to get up with us. So he'd slow it down in that zone, and then he'd wait for the press to almost start retreating towards the ball. And once they do retreat towards him, so say he's got one on his back, and then you've got one converging from a different direction, so off of Colwill, that's when he'll sort of make that little play here into Vega, and then you've almost then forced Bournemouth to come and sit deeper, and you've set them from their initial sort of 4-2-4 heavy press. You've now disengaged that side of the press, that intense version, and you've now settled them into a deeper 4-4-2, where now Chelsea have the onus of the ball. They're the ones in control. And that's something, again, we just didn't do enough. Did not do enough against Bournemouth. Again, because the tempo was always moving too fast. The players in these zones weren't as adept at slowing it down. Second half, it improved. And I do think massively that is due to the substitutions. Now, one more thing to mention with this lineup that was going wrong is Colwill was often shoved out here because Sanchez would sort of be in around there, Fofana and Disasi. So the distances when Sanchez was almost marked off by a player in here was absolutely huge between these two, Fofana and Colwill. And I mentioned this in my pre-match thread on Twitter. That's going to be an issue because the way to get that ball into this area is Colwill will have to peel out here. But if you lose the ball, they have got a direct attacking space with a massive distance to cover for both these defenders. And it did hurt Chelsea a few times. And it did make it look like Chelsea were being caught in transition. And I do think that was just to do with the distances and losing the ball. When these two are your primary ball ball holders in the back line, they were the two getting on the ball more than Colwill. That's an issue. Colwill is so much better in this zone where he can control the ball. Fofana, I think, struggled in that central centre-back zone. I think he struggled to control the pace of the game. Everything was very forced. Like I say, he was getting quite easily shoved onto that right foot where he had to play out to Disasi. And that the press of Bournemouth were really easily able to force that ball to this zone if they wanted it to go there. I think that Chelsea would be manipulated far too easy in that first phase by that. And I think that's largely down to this dynamic here. Now for the changes, which the main changes for me that made a massive difference in this game. So obviously I've got the other 4 changes. I've got them all on the side. Firstly, this change I think was absolutely huge. I think Tosin made a massive difference. And of course, the other one being Sancho. Now, why these two? Tosin, firstly, massively improved the ability to find those passes through the lines, to slow the tempo down and play those little sort of intricate passing networks in here. And then he'd all of a sudden just expansively find that ball. He did that extremely well, far better, and he wasn't getting locked onto one side as easily as Fofana was in the first half. Very easy to do both ways, which was very good from him. And it allowed Colwill to almost come inside a little bit more. Fofana sort of expanded this way, and then we started to see Colwill get on the ball more, and he started to find those passes, which is, again, what's been such a key figure for Chelsea, progressing through the left side and then finding the right side to penetrate. That happened a lot more in the second half, and I feel this is the reason why. And the other reason why is, as I said earlier, if you remember, this area of the pitch that I've got highlighted is extremely important because the onus this season has been progress left, penetrate right. So when you're progressing into this left zone, this ball has to stick. Sancho, the introduction of Sancho was absolutely huge. Not just because the performance was good, he shows that creative passing that we spoke about. If you haven't seen the video that we uploaded a few days ago on Sancho, pretty much everything I said in that video came to fruition. So if you haven't watched that, I do massively recommend that you go watch that because it quite literally says all of what we saw from Sancho. But when that ball goes into him, it's that ability to not just hold the ball and his press resistance and that ability to just be comfortable, right? It's also then his ability to manipulate and receive facing forwards with an open body stance to the point where defenders can't fully commit on him because he's so agile and he wants to react. He wants a player to bite so that he can then make the other direction. If they come in on him here, he can just knock it past him, he's gone. That's what he wants, and they know that. So he makes it extremely hard for him to sort of receive the ball, for them to receive the ball and make a tackle on him, for example. But when he receives in that area of the pitch, which is what we're saying, when that ball sticks here, Bournemouth players are then sort of gravitating towards that side of the pitch. And it did open up huge gaps someone like Sancho to manipulate, as we said. So the second half, it was sort of Palmer. I'll make the other changes on the board as well here, just to fully add everything into the mix. But what we sort of then saw is Sancho, once he's making that ball stick in here, something we didn't do in the first half with Neto, is then Chelsea can get into their structure, as we said, about a little bit higher up, start to pin the ball in. Cucurella can sort of sustain himself in this zone where he can make a few different runs. We saw one time Cucurella make the run into here, Sancho played the ball in behind. There was another time where, for the goal, it was actually Vega that made the run forward, and he made sort of an overlapping run. Sancho was a little bit more sort of ready to play the ball. Vega made a run in. He used that to drag him away, and then that ball, Sancho makes that perfect pass into Nkunku, which again comes from the defenders being split and the spacing between the back four, where he can play that really clever pass, and then Nkunku does the rest, and it was absolutely brilliant. But what Sancho gives you on that side of the pitch is ball retention, the ability to sort of do what Palmer does on the right, but he can go both ways. And like I say, go watch the video if you haven't already, because Sancho is such a big pickup for this team in terms of the dynamics he can give you. I love the dynamic of Sancho and Madueke, because I think you just get a bit of everything from both of them. I think Sancho's got that more instinctive ability to play in tight spaces, especially if you're going to overload the left side of the pitch and focus your progression routes on the left side of the pitch. And I do think that's perfect to have him, who can operate in these tight areas. He can draw players towards him. And then once he does attract that sort of that double team, or players are gravitating to that side of the pitch, that then means that when that ball does make its way over here, you're going to find that 2v1 with your two of your most dangerous players this season. And that's exactly what Chelsea are trying to do. And especially if you have Enzo in here as well, that dynamic and having that sort of ball retention in tight spaces and that ability to then Sancho to then play it back. You have somebody like Enzo here who can then make that long switch. The dynamics of that team are really good. But the main thing that changed in that second half, like I say, was just sort of being able to control the tempo more, make that ball stick in zones that we wanted to, and also having a player here who wasn't getting forced to one side and progression wasn't getting stunted by Bournemouth just easily manipulating. Part of that is Bournemouth did tire. In the second half, their press did begin to tire and wear out. And that is when Chelsea were then able to find those passes through the lines and actually get a little bit of joy. So, again, we're going to speak about that now. So we're going to go out of the live section. I'm going to quickly talk about Bournemouth's press because it was just brilliant. And I think it's really important to give them the credit they deserve, because I think they are one of the best, if not the best team in the league at sort of initiating that high press and sort of manipulating teams how they want to using that high press. Now, of course, on his debut, Jadon Sancho did win the man of the match, showing exactly what we said in our last video about Sancho and what we just said in the live analysis. He just offers that creative spark on that left-hand side. He can draw players towards him with that dribbling technique, that slow and intricate play, and then he can find those incisive creative passes through the lines, as he did for Nkunku's goal. But the last thing I did just want to touch on at the back end of this video is look at this graph, which shows how effective Bournemouth's press is. And if you look in that top right corner, those are the sorts of teams that are going to cause you an issue with their press. Palace actually didn't against Chelsea. They found a very good way to sort of nullify that, dropping Caicedo into the back four. But the likes of Bournemouth, Liverpool, Spurs, who you'd expect to be up there because they're high intense pressers, they do make it hard for you to play out and you have to find other solutions. This is a brilliant example. As you can see, one player between the lines of Fofana and Colwill, with one pressing Fofana, very much forcing that ball to that right-hand side, as we touched on during the live analysis. Colwill having to drag so far wide, Sanchez acting as the link, but that Bournemouth press keeping everybody facing their own goal, stopping them facing forwards, especially when the attackers receive the ball. And Bournemouth, especially in that first half, their press was excellent, and that is massively part of the game, and you have to give them credit for that. So, what did you make of this game for Chelsea? Of course, there was quite a few negatives in this game, but at the end of the day, we won ugly, we got a 1-0 win, and we got the 3 points, which is a massive, massive achievement. Something that we didn't do much last season in terms of getting ugly wins in games that you need to get those 3 points and get over the line, which we managed to do today. And I think that kind of makes up for that Palace game where In my opinion, Chelsea absolutely dominated proceedings and should have won that game and got all 3 points. We get the 3 points here today. Lots to be positive about in that sense. Move on to West Ham next week. Please do, as always, drop a like if you haven't already. Comment, let me know what you thought of the game, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video.